Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome here to all of you at the Rode Hoed here in Amsterdam. Very glad that you could make it this evening, although I'm sure there are many other interesting things to do on such an evening, but nothing can be as interesting as the presentations you will hear tonight. Now, welcome on behalf of the North Africa and Middle East Department of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs to this lecture, the Henriette van Lyndenlezing lecture, with the title of Fuel for Conflict, the Impact of the Plunging Oil Price on Geopolitics in the Middle East. My name is Ernesto Braam. Now, we've all seen that the oil price has collapsed, in fact, by 50% from its peak in mid-June 2014 to below, at some point, to below even $50 per barrel. Now, the quarterly economic brief on the Middle East and North Africa, which is published quarterly, that's what the name says, by the World Bank. So the last one was from January this year, a couple of months back, basically said that oil importers are glad with the fall in the oil prices. Well, that makes sense, I guess, because of improvement of their current accounts and also the cost of fuel subsidies in many countries, in many Arab countries that import oil are basically lower cost for that. Now, the economies of oil exporters, logically, it's the reverse, it's the opposite, are hurt. And oil accounts for even more than 90% of some of the exporting countries. For example, Yemen and Libya. And we're all aware of the current situation in those two countries. We follow it, we see it on the news, we read it in newspapers. Now, the GCC oil exporters are in a better position. They can cushion the impact of the drop in oil price. And I just understood from our oil experts that there was a 4% increase in the price of Brent oil, I think. Oh, decrease even. Okay. You can see I'm not the experts are there. Also, just a small remark, but that will not be the focus necessarily of this evening, the nuclear negotiations that are taking place between Iran and the E3+3 or the P5+1, depends what mathematical calculation you make. In Lausanne, there was a small outcome, some agreement on some of the parameters, but not a complete agreement yet. So we will also see tonight from one of our speakers if there's any impact of oil production, drop in oil prices, basically the dynamics on the negotiations or vice versa. Now, we can see tonight we will focus on the causes of the fluctuation in the oil prices, so basically the drop, but it's going up and down a little bit. And whether one of the causes is the increase in US shale oil production, whether there is a shift of the policy of OPEC from price targeting to market share, whether that is one of the causes, or whether it's the demand side, whether there's a lower demand for oil, because China is not growing as fast as we were used to. Still growing, but not as fast, so they need less fuel, and maybe that has an effect, but we will hear that tonight. And whether the drop in oil price, whether it's for purely economic reasons, financial reasons, or maybe even for political reasons, or a mix of that. There's a lot of speculation. Many analysts like to write about it and become famous by articles, fantastic theories, sometimes conspiracy theories, and so. But the three experts we have tonight, they will tell you the real truth about the oil price. At least their own views. Now, we have three speakers here, and we'll see whether we will manage to get someone via Skype. It's not sure yet because it seems that our person who's coming in from via Skype, there's a sandstorm there, so that might disturb the communications, so we'll have to wait for that. but I think that adds to the excitement of this evening. It should be not too predictable, just like the oil price. So I will introduce our experts one by one, and I will just introduce them shortly before they start to speak. So I will only introduce now our first speaker, Dr. Anas Alhajji, sitting there on the right side from the audience. Now, he is originally from Syria, for a long time already living in the US, but traveling, of course, and we're happy with that, otherwise he wouldn't be with us. He is a chief economist with NGP, Energy Capital Management. So that's a company that invests in the energy sector. He will explain himself how many billions that is. It's an awful lot of money. I don't know how many zeros, but he's very successful at that. Now, he's a sought-after speaker, so we're happy that he's here, including the World Economic Forum he has addressed. He has written, and I haven't counted this, but it says 500 papers, articles, columns on energy and macroeconomics. Well, I'm sure that's correct, and maybe it's even now 600. Now, prior to joining NGP, Dr. Alhajji was professor of economics at the University of Oklahoma, and he was also with the Colorado School of Mines and with Ohio Northern University. Now, Dr. Alhajji will explain the causes of the fall of the oil price. What are the reasons behind that? And with a specific focus on the dynamics of the oil market, and also, of course, address the issue I just mentioned, whether there's some political motives behind it or not. Now, just a few practical remarks, as I always make. Please switch off the ringtones or other interesting music you have on your portable devices, because, and I have said that before, if I hear any ringtone or nice music, even if it's my favorite music, I will remember it and not give you an opportunity to ask a question during the Q&A. So that's an incentive to switch it off now. Of course, don't switch off your phone completely, because you can use Twitter to ask questions, to make remarks, and the hashtag for tonight is hashtag HVL, so that's for Henriette van Lyndenlezing, HVL Middle East. So hashtag HVL Middle East. And we'll try to have the experts answer your questions. Now, as I always say, whatever will be said by our three experts tonight does not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Neither does it necessarily contradict our views, but I will not say when it's in line with our views or when it contradicts. So sometimes you can see by the eyebrows, but well, okay, you have to interpret the body language. Now, I'm very happy, and I would like to invite Dr. Anas Alhajji with a warm round of applause to take the floor. And we have about 12 minutes.
It is a pleasure to speak before you. NGP, Energy Capital Management, is an $18 billion private equity. It's 26 years old, and we invest mainly in natural resources, but mostly in upstream oil and gas. And since we are talking about the American shale revolution, we do invest almost in every single shale and every single play in North America. And we are also affiliated with the Carlyle Group. They say that God created economists to make the weathermen look good. And I say that God created physicians to make economists look good. And here is why. These are my grandparents when they got married. At age 36, my grandfather was diagnosed with TB, and he was given 6 months to live. 6 months. Ladies and gentlemen, here is my grandfather at his 100th birthday. Thank you. So here we are, economists. Okay, we are wrong on our forecast, 1%, 2%. But, to be 60, 70 years off, these are the physicians whom I'm talking about. Anyway, he died when he was 105. Not from natural causes, he died from an accident. Now, there is a reason why I brought up this picture and why I'm going to talk about it. The main reason for it is that he was Syrian. My grandmother was Italian. He was an Arab, she was European. He was a Muslim, she was a Catholic. And if a Muslim and Catholic can make it for 80 years of marriage, anyone can make it. I mention this in the light of what's happening in the Middle East today. I think this is a wonderful story to tell. But there are other reasons why I mention that. Before I get to that, I just want, now you know I am originally from Syria and we speak Arabic in Syria. And for those who do not know the Arabic language, the letter P does not exist. We have the letter B. And therefore, Arab students, when they go to study in the West, they end up with problems, like they bark their cars. Or when they speak to a girl, they don't know whether to say, you are so beautiful or so pitiful. But remember, it's about that letter P. We do have presidents in the Middle East. And we are confused about that. Sorry. Presidents, but we cannot pronounce the P, so it's easier to call them dictators. The other reason why I brought up my grandparents to the picture is that at his 100th birthday, basically, he decided to write his memoir. Remember, given the time span he lived, he participated in 3 major wars. But he said in his civilian life, he witnessed 15 killings. And he lived long enough to see every single killer being killed. Now, what is the takeaway from this story? If he died when he was 36, he would have seen the injustice in life. But he lived long enough to see justice being made. And the takeaway from it is the short run is different from the long run. Now let's talk about the oil market. It's exactly the same story. The short run is different from the long run, and this is going to be the main theme of what I'm going to talk about today. But before I do that, I want to frame the discussion today by showing you this. Generally speaking, we need all energy sources. If people want to shut down nuclear plants or coal plants or drain the hydro and others, we are going to end up in the dark. So I'm just trying to put the framework for our discussion today so we know the importance of each energy source among all the sources. At the same time, this picture is taken from India. But imagine if those guys who are putting that cabin there, they are dreaming of a car and they want a car. So imagine if those donkeys basically become cars later on, just like the way the Chinese switched bicycles to cars. I'm talking about the demand for oil here. And also, I would like to show you this picture. Yes, we would like to be efficient, we would like to have all the renewable resources, etc., but this is just a dream. This is just a dream. So I'm bringing up the idea here is, yes, we have many wishful ideas we would like to implement, but here is reality. And what that reality? 30 gallons of jet fuel per minute. That's reality. So in our discussions, basically, we have to be realistic about what can be put in the market. When we talk about the American oil revolution or the shale revolution, we call it a revolution because it flips the conventional wisdom on its head. I'm going to go quickly over those slides just because of time limitation. What you see basically is that black line in the middle. American oil production been declining, and then we had the shale revolution, and then production started going up. Demand declined for various reasons, and the net imports basically declined. And one of the reasons for the decline in net imports is that we had a presidential order in the United States since 1974 that we cannot export crude oil. We can export the product, so we can take the crude oil, refine it, and whatever gets out of that refinery, we can send it out. But you can see the benefits from that shale revolution is that dependence of the United States of America on imports declined substantially. And I'm going to skip this slide here. This is really probably the most important slide that I'm going to talk about, that when we talk about the oil market and when US politicians talk about energy independence, they miss a very important point, that all the increase in oil in North America is light sweet crude that cannot be exported. So naturally what happened is we replaced imports from the countries that export that crude to the United States. Politicians started talking about lowering our imports from the Middle East. They were not sophisticated enough to realize the quality issue. What we import from the Middle East is sour crude, and most of it is heavy. So the American Revolution basically did not reduce imports from the Middle East. It did reduce imports from West Africa and North Africa. That's Angola, mainly Angola, Nigeria, and Algeria. You see those dotted lines basically going toward zero, as you see here. But look at the imports from Saudi Arabia. Did not decline as much. Look at imports from Kuwait. Did not decline as much. The same thing applies to Iraq. So the American shale revolution, in a sense, split OPEC. OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Split OPEC into two halves. Those who lost market share and those who did not lose market share. That's really the impact on OPEC. The other issue here is it changed everything in America. If you look at the left side here, what we've seen is America was exporting and importing and increasing petroleum products, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and everything else. That's got flipped. Imports went down and exports went up, and went up by multiples. Then on the right side, we have something called NGLs, that natural gas liquids. These are liquids exist in natural gas wells. And what happened is US exports of NGLs within 5 years increased by 13-fold, taking market share from Saudi Arabia in the Caribbean, in Central America and Latin America. So do you think the Saudis are going to be happy about that? So the main idea here is, historically, since 2010, prices should have declined in 2011. But we had the Arab Spring. We lost a lot of oil from Libya, Egypt, Tunisia, Yemen, Syria, etc. And the United States basically kept increasing its production and compensated for the loss from the Arab Spring countries. And then here comes a time when some of that oil started coming back to the market. Demand growth was flattening out, and the gap started increasing. US oil production continued to go up, while demand and the disruptions basically started going down. We ended up with a surplus in the market. The Saudis looked at it and said, okay, I have a surplus that is more than 1 million barrels. I cannot take that alone. But even if I have to take it alone, it's meaningless. And the reason why, because the Saudi oil is sour, while the surplus in the market is sweet. So even if they cut, they are cutting the wrong market. At the same time, they looked at those pictures. They are building mega refineries, and the Americans basically are taking their market share in products. They are looking at the NGLs, which was a strategic decision by OPEC members to increase production. And at the same time, for the last 35 years, Saudi Arabia took a strategic decision to focus on energy-intensive industries, mostly petrochemical plants, that depend on methane and ethane. These are gases. There was no competition around the world because all the competition depend on something called naphtha that comes from oil. So when oil prices went up, the cost of petrochemical companies around the world basically went up, but the Saudis enjoyed the low cost. All of a sudden, we have the shale revolution that brought in massive amount of methane and ethane, and petrochemical companies start moving back to the United States. The Saudis looked at their strategic objectives. They have petrochemicals to diversify their economy and achieve economic development. They have refineries because they want to gain from the value added. And they have NGLs because there is a big market for it in Asia and it's not subject to OPEC quota. And they are losing on every strategic decision they made. So they had no choice but to intervene in the market by letting the market operate on its own. And prices plummeted. And that's where we are today. The main issue here is that one of the lessons we learned from the shale revolution is that the only constant is change, but that change is happening faster and faster and faster. Therefore, those oil cycles are happening faster than before. The reaction of the industry in terms of rig count, in terms of spending, etc., happened really fast. And when we go back up, it's going to be really fast too. But there will be a time when the Saudis and others basically are going to realize this is not sustainable for various reasons. Probably during the discussion we will talk about it. But it is very clear that when prices go up, the Saudis will limit prices at around $70 to $75. Because at $70 to $75, there will be no additional quantities of oil coming from non-OPEC to take market share from any of the OPEC members. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you. Now, thanks very much, Dr. Alhajji. I think you really enlightened us. Maybe you gave a few tips even where to invest in and so. So I think all of you are here tonight. You're very privileged because if you follow his advice, you will be very rich very soon, if you're not yet. Now, anyway, the next speaker we go to is Professor Mahmoud El-Gamal. He was born actually in Cairo, in Egypt, has been living in the US for a while, is currently professor of economics and statistics at Rice University, Houston, Texas. Now, we know what Texas is known for, oil, of course, so he sits right on top of it. And he is also the chair of Islamic economy and finance and management. So that's a different and very interesting angle, I think, interesting combination. Now, from 2014 till 2015, so earlier this year, he was with the American University in Cairo. I understand you still also working with them. Previously, and I will not mention everything because his CV is too long, I think, to mention, but just to take out a few highlights. He was previously, among others, with the IMF and also with the California Institute of Technology. He holds a BA and MA from American University in Cairo, a master's in statistics. Sounds a very difficult study. So, master in statistics from Stanford University, so a very renowned university, and a PhD from Northwestern University. Now, if that is not impressive enough, he has written quite a number of books and articles. And just to mention one which is very relevant for this evening, for this lecture and panel discussion, one with the title of Oil, Dollars, Debt and Crisis, the Global Curse of Black Gold. Now, Professor El-Gamal will discuss the oil price, but sort of make a bridge to the geopolitics, the balance of power, or maybe the imbalance of power which we see in the Middle East and North Africa. And maybe we'll also lift a tip of the veil and to tell us who benefits from this current situation. Now, with a warm round of applause, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Ernesto. Good evening. I will start by going through a graph of the real price of oil over a pretty long period of time. Real price means that we've removed the effect of inflation. So this graph shows the price of oil in 2013 dollars. And you will notice something very interesting. The real price of oil crossed $100 essentially in 3 episodes, and all 3 of these episodes had something in common. There are periods where we have global economic growth. So many people forget that globalization was not invented in the second part of the 20th century. There was an episode of globalization in the late part of the 19th century. Two, very lax monetary policy. And I'll explain why in the 3 episodes there was very lax monetary policy. And the third, some sort of geopolitical strife. We need all 3 components in order to get oil prices at these levels, which in all cases have resulted in recessions. So the first period in the mid-1860s, of course, the world was struggling. We had come out of a bimetallic world where people were using both silver and gold coins, and the world hadn't yet gone onto the gold standard, which they did in 1870s. So we had a very lax monetary policy simply because money wasn't linked to anything until we got on the gold standard. There was a period of economic growth because that was the earlier period of globalization. And of course, the mid-1860s is when you had the US Civil War, you had Bismarck's Northern adventures, France's Latin American adventures, and so on. So all 3 criteria were met then. I'll skip the part in the middle where oil prices were clearly much, much lower in real terms than they were in that period. And then what happens in 1973, other than the famous story about the oil embargo and so on, is that the US was overextended militarily and had been spending to such an extent that they could not fulfill the obligation under the Bretton Woods Accord to pay central banks the gold that ostensibly was backing the dollar at $35 an ounce of gold. Indeed, France was threatening to ask for its gold, and England was going to follow suit, and therefore President Richard Nixon decided to close the gold window. And all of a sudden, the central currency of the international financial system, the US dollar, was no longer backed by gold. It wasn't backed by anything. And so we have lax monetary policy. We have a second wave of globalization that is starting, in part because of that lax monetary policy. Indeed, as Paul Volcker said later, we were all surprised that we discovered the world was more willing to hold dollars backed by nothing than dollars backed by gold. And that fueled global trade and growth. And then, of course, in 1979, we have the Iranian Revolution and geopolitical strife. Then we have a period of calm when Paul Volcker became Fed chairman, raised interest rates, basically imposed some disciplined monetary policy. And then in the aftermath of the tech stocks bubble bursting, central bankers started flooding the markets with liquidity. And of course, we had the Iraq invasion in 2003 and geopolitical strife. So again, we have all 3 components: growth, lax monetary policy, and some sort of geopolitical strife. There is an underlying real cycle that drives the oil market. So what is shown in this graph, you can think of the blue graph as sort of the growth of world economic activity, and the red graph as the growth in the world's energy use. And of course, the 2 follow each other pretty closely, and you can see that the cycle sometimes is attenuated and sometimes is amplified. A lot of this amplification happens when the combination of lax monetary policy and geopolitical strife makes prices overshoot in either direction, hence amplifying the recession that would have ensued anyway, or the recovery that would have ensued anyway. Okay? The way it works is simply that when there's a period of growth, eventually there's shortage of energy supply, so prices start to rise. With a lag, companies start to invest in new infrastructure in order to produce more energy. By the time all this energy comes online, the high prices have choked the growth, so the economy is starting to slow down just as more energy supplies are coming on market. So now there's a surplus, so prices come down. Then you stop investing in infrastructure to produce more energy resources, just in time for the economy to have bottomed again. And the cycle goes on and on and on. Except that when there's a lot of cash and some story triggered by geopolitical strife, the market overreacts because people can use the cheap credit in order to leverage their bets against or with energy prices. One of the effects of the fluctuations is the oil rent. So what is shown in this graph is the total global oil rents as a percentage of global GDP. And you can see the effect of the 73 and then 79 spikes in oil prices. That basically, if you think of 2% of world GDP, it's a huge amount. When all this oil rent is sloshing around, it's getting invested in different financial instruments. Back in the 1980s, it resulted in a sovereign credit crisis because bankers in the 1980s in New York had the great idea that countries never go out of business and therefore were a good credit risk. And so they lent to a lot of developing countries, especially developing countries that had a lot of oil under the ground as collateral. And of course, when the oil price eventually fell, they didn't have the assets to back that debt, and we had a very serious credit crisis, not only in Latin America, but also in Morocco and Jordan and elsewhere. Another venue for the recycling of petrodollars is the military expenditure of the countries that receive these petrodollars. So we have the two waves. I should also say that the second wave after the Iraq invasion, these petrodollars also went into the market. By themselves, they wouldn't have created a credit bubble. Just like in the 1980s, by themselves, the recycled petrodollars wouldn't have created the credit bubble. It was also all the excess savings from Japan. And in the mid-2000s, it was all the excess savings from China, together with the petrodollars, tipped the market. But what I'm interested in here, in order to make that transition to geopolitics for our third speaker, is to talk about another venue for the recycling of petrodollars, which is military expenditure. So I'll jump straight to this graph. And here what we're showing is military expenditure as a percentage of GDP. And I've picked only a few countries in the Middle East. But the interesting thing you will notice is that countries that we think of as having large militaries, like Egypt in the dark blue, like Turkey in the light blue, like Iran in the orange, all have military expenditures as a percentage of GDP that's in the order of 3 to 2%. Whereas the countries that have military expenditures as a percentage of GDP at 6% or above are countries that are suffering some sort of existential angst or geopolitical angst. And in this particular graph, it's only Saudi Arabia and Israel. Let me first go to this one, then I'll go back to the other one. Saudi Arabia, of course, we know is the swing producer in oil markets. And most of the oil production comes from the eastern province, right on the Persian Gulf. The greatest threat to the world supply of oil is if there is a closure of the Straits of Hormuz, which is the venue through which most of this oil eventually makes it to Asia. So 17 million barrels of oil approximately were flowing through the Straits of Hormuz each day. If there's a closure of the Straits of Hormuz, you're going to see oil prices well above $200 a barrel, and the world will go into very, very deep recession. That's why a relatively small altercation in Bahrain fetched a geopolitical premium in oil prices way above the geopolitical premium that we fetched when there's a bigger military operation in Yemen, simply because Bab el-Mandab, which is right here, only sees 3.8 million barrels a day flow through. And of course, Yemen is not nearly as much of a military threat to Saudi Arabia as Iran would be, where you could have a serious conflict that will close the Straits of Hormuz. So we have a period now when oil prices are sufficiently low and the world is going into a very slow economic recovery. We're starting to see it in the US, and then hopefully for those of you who live here in Europe, there will be an economic recovery sometime in our lifetime. But we also have a very lax monetary policy so far. We have a Fed chairman who's saying she may start to raise interest rates in the future. She wants to slowly wean the world off this excess credit, but it's still sloshing around the system. So if we also get a serious geopolitical threat, we're going to see oil prices spike again, and we will be back to, I was going to finish here so I can yield my minutes and use them in long answers to questions. So basically, we can get yet a third spike. The reason that we had not one, but two spikes in the aftermath of the Iraq invasion is because instead of letting the global economy slow down, letting oil prices fall, and then letting the world go through a normal recovery, the Fed, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, every central bank that we know of started flooding the world with liquidity and inflated a global bubble that now couldn't go into tech stocks anymore, couldn't go into houses. So where did it go? Into commodities. Well, when it went into commodities, it raised oil prices again, because it's one of the commodities that the investors are putting money, which paradoxically is coming from the oil rents, to buy oil futures. So we have the potential catastrophic scenario of continued lax monetary policy plus some geopolitical problem that becomes sufficiently legitimate that oil prices spike back up above $100. And that's a scenario that for your sake and mine and your children's sake and mine, we hope does not materialize. The alternative is that we gradually have a stricter monetary policy going forward. Oil prices remain low for the next 5 to 7 years, and maybe people will start finding jobs in Greece. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, thanks very much, Professor El-Gamal, for also your enlightening and especially building that bridge between the oil dynamics and the geopolitics. And we're now going to dig a little bit deeper into geopolitics. So basically the relations between countries in the Middle East and North Africa, the balances between them, also their priorities, alliances or feuds. And we have invited for that particularly Patrick Clawson. And we're very happy that he's here. He came from Washington, and he is Director of Research with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He directs the Iran Security Initiative. So I think in his presentation he also will weave in a bit of Iran, I hope. And he is actually the author of 150 articles. Now again, I didn't count them, but I'm sure it's true, and maybe even more than that. Those articles were mainly focused on the Middle East and economics, and he has written, I think, 18 books and studies on Iran, so he basically knows, well, an awful lot about Iran, I think, a lot. Now, he's frequently, he can be seen on television, different stations, CNN, BBC World, etc., and he writes op-eds, articles, gets interviewed by New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, etc. Now he has been, and that's I think very interesting, and maybe not everyone will like it from the Middle East, but still, he has been an expert witness because of his expertise in 30, or I think more than 30 federal cases in the US against Iran. So maybe there will be some questions about that too here from the audience later, what that is all about. Now, prior to joining the Washington Institute, he was a senior researcher with the National Defense University and also was a senior economist with the IMF and the World Bank. So it's quite an interesting career. He holds a PhD in economics, and he will give his view of the role of energy and resources in general in conflicts in the Middle East. And now he wants me to stop introducing him because he's and focus on the competition between Saudi Arabia, Iran, and also put in Israel, and all of that from his own view, but particularly from the US point of view, I hope. Now, good luck. Warm round of applause.
Well, as you heard from our previous speakers, the short term and the long term can differ. And what I'm going to be talking about tonight is primarily the long term rather than the short term, like what happened in Lausanne tonight. And the perception in the United States, and indeed I would say throughout the Middle East and through most oil industry observers, is that over the long term, the United States is going to be producing more oil and consuming not much more than it does at present, so that the United States will be importing less and less oil. Indeed, British Petroleum forecasts that within about 15 years, the United States is going to be a net exporter of oil, with the United States producing substantially more oil than any other country in the world. That's a big shift from the days not too long ago when the United States was importing about 60% of the oil that it consumed. And with this change, it's going to be more and more difficult to explain to the American people why the United States should stay actively involved in the Middle East. Because when it's been necessary for U.S. politicians to go to the American people to make a case for why the United States should make a major commitment to the region, their one-word explanation has been oil. In 1990, when the United States was debating whether to send over 500,000 soldiers to Saudi Arabia to liberate Kuwait, the then Secretary of State James Baker, when he was asked, what's the reason? He said, there's three reasons: oil, oil, and oil. Right? And that connected with the American people. And so if the United States is now a net exporter of oil, why the heck are we in the Middle East? We're not in the Middle East because we particularly love the countries in the Middle East, especially the oil-producing countries. It's not like the U.S. commitment to the defense of Europe during the Cold War, which is partly based on geostrategic interests, but also based upon the close relationships between the peoples of Europe and of the United States. I will let you in on a secret. Saudis don't like Americans very much, and Americans don't like Saudis very much. We, in fact, recognize that we have common geostrategic interests and need to cooperate, and we work together closely, but there's not a whole lot of love lost between the peoples. So the perception has risen throughout the Middle East that the United States is leaving, that the United States is drawing down its role in the Middle East, partly because the U.S. is tired after the experiences of largely failed wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also partly because of this trend that the United States is going to be using less and less imported oil. And that makes U.S. allies uncomfortable because they are concerned that they will be left on their own to face, or largely on their own, to face serious security challenges in the region. And in particular, what worries the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Israelis is Iran. Because they feel that Iran is what we call a revisionist power. That is to say, Iran wants to revise current power relationships in the region to its benefit. Iran, historically, was a much larger country than it is today. I like to remind audiences that the first marathon was run to bring the news of the desperate battle against the mighty Persian army invading Europe. And that was 2,500 years ago. So for most of the last 2,500 years, Iran has been several times its current size. And Iranians think that's where it ought to be, right? And add to this nationalist impulse a religious impulse, where Iran portrays itself as the natural defender of not only Shia Muslims, but indeed of true Islam, and the leader of those standing up against global arrogance, which is the favorite phrase to describe the United States. And so those who would have to give up some of their existing influence to satisfy Iran's grievances include the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Israelis. They don't like this idea. and they would resist. And if the United States leaves the region, they could resist on their own in ways that frankly may not be that pleasant. Let me just point out to you that within the last 6 months, we have seen the Emiratis and the Egyptians cooperating together to use military strikes against Libya. We have seen Saudi Arabia organizing a military campaign in Yemen. And we can well imagine that we've also seen, by the way, others in the region also responding. Turkey has been very active in opposing what they see as an Iranian-sponsored government in Syria. And we can all of us use our fertile imaginations about how the Israelis will react to an Iran nuclear deal that they think is way too dangerous. So you may think that the Middle East has been an unstable area. If the United States is no longer involved in the region, I hate to tell you this, but it's likely to be even more unstable. And I would suggest that's the reason why the region's perception that the United States is going to leave the region is probably mistaken. And indeed, I would say that Secretary Baker was mistaken when he said that the reason the United States was in the Middle East was oil, oil, oil. Oil has certainly been an important factor, but I would read the historical record as suggesting that the principal reason the United States has been in the Middle East has actually been because of the instability in that region that has forced American president after American president to turn his attention to a region that he would have dearly liked to ignore. So President Jimmy Carter was not eager to get involved in having to deal with this messy revolution in Iran, but there was a little matter of an embassy takeover that forced him to do that and cost him his presidency. And we've seen president after president, Ronald Reagan with the Iran-Contra affair, George H.W. Bush with the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, Bill Clinton with the Arab-Israeli peace process, George W. Bush with the invasion of Iraq. We've seen 5 U.S. presidents in a row who were forced to turn their attention to the Middle East. My institute likes to quote a Secretary of State who will remain anonymous, who's said to the president for whom he worked, "Sir, you may wish to leave the Middle East, but the Middle East will not leave you alone." And that, I think, is the reason why we have seen President Obama, who did not want to start another Middle East war, send U.S. forces in to confront the Islamic State or Daesh in both Syria and Iraq. And I think that we are likely to continue to see the United States being involved in the region because of this instability, even though the United States is not going to be, or the most likely prospect is the United States is not going to be a major importer of oil from anywhere, including not from the Middle East.
Thanks very much. Now, thanks very much. I think that gives enough food for discussion, because I'm sure not everyone will 100% agree with you. And that's good, because that's why we have a debate. And I don't think I have to repeat the disclaimer for this evening. But we now move to the panel discussion. I think the sandstorm is still there, where our expert who would come in from Skype is located. So I'm afraid he will not come in, but I think we have 3 experts here who are opinionated enough to have a good panel discussion. So actually, I received a question via Twitter from Robert Lacey. And Robert Lacey is an expert on Saudi Arabia. He's written a book, Inside the Kingdom. He goes to Saudi Arabia a lot. So the question he asked is, it looks as if Saudi Arabia envisages a future with 2 client states, this is what Robert Lacey says, at either end of the Red Sea, Egypt and Yemen. Now, can it afford it? Can Saudi Arabia afford, in the words of Robert Lacey, those 2 client states? And if so, for how long? Now, Patrick, would you like to comment on that?
Let us start with the gentleman living in Egypt to discuss that.
Okay. Please.
I think the Egyptians would rather think they're a partner rather than a client. Long-term cooperation has certainly been the mark of the Egyptian relationship with Saudi Arabia, not least during the liberation of Kuwait in 1990. It's, of course, one of the hallmarks of the current administration in Egypt that President Sisi said, if there's any problem in the Gulf, we consider it our problem, and the term he used in Arabic can be translated roughly to mean we'll get there as fast as we can. Certainly, in Libya, there has been a challenge for the Egyptian military to take care of the ISIS branch there. Yemen is too dangerous for Saudi Arabia to ignore. After all, most Saudis consider that Yemen is the original home from which the tribes originated, and therefore it's very important to secure that backyard. And I think the Egyptian military is feeling that it's fulfilling its patriotic duty. And of course, the latest Arab summit in Sharm el-Sheikh reiterated the need for the Arab League to establish a common force to take care quickly of any problems that might emerge, obviously with the backdrop of what's happening in Syria and Iraq and so on. So I wouldn't say that these are client states. They're certainly not as rich, but they provide other
yeah, but let's say, I mean, if we take out the word client state, because I understand your objection to that, but can Saudi Arabia afford supporting, I mean, both countries?
It can't afford not to.
It can afford not to, okay. But in financial terms, could it afford it? Or it cannot afford to in political sense, or?
It cannot afford to have chaos in the Sinai or in the Western Sahara in Egypt or in Yemen, and it can't afford to have uprising after uprising that might even cause political turmoil at home in Saudi Arabia. And therefore, it's not a luxury that they have to cooperate.
I'd like to
just
comment.
a quick comment. The Saudis are feeling encircled these days because they feel that there are, as some Iranian politicians have been saying, that there are governments.
Now don't point at me.
No, all right. There are some Iranian politicians who say that there are now governments friendly to Iran in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. It's pretty much an arc around Saudi Arabia, especially when you include Bahrain, which has been a very troubled country. And in each case, those are governments dominated by Shiites. So the Saudis feel they're being squeezed by the Iranians, that they have to respond. I entirely agree with you that chaotic conditions in countries like Yemen, which has a population as large, if not larger than Saudi Arabia, and a long land border that it shares with Saudi Arabia, or chaotic conditions in Egypt, would be a dramatic security threat to Saudi Arabia. And so they would be prepared to make commit considerable resources in order to try to restore stability in those countries.
Anas, I understand you've lived in Saudi Arabia, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in your formative years, I guess. So,
Previous life.
what's your view?
I would like to answer this question from a completely different angle, from an investment angle, and what that means to us as investors. The Saudi Foreign Reserves right now, or the Central Bank Reserve, SAMA, declined to year 2000 levels, which means that all the surplus they accumulated from $100 oil are wiped out right now. And at the same time, the credit rating agencies downgraded the credit of Saudi Arabia, which means that current oil prices are not sustainable. And there will be a time when Saudi Arabia will be forced basically to cooperate with other members of OPEC and cut output and raise prices, because the other choice is to borrow and borrowing is going to be very expensive given that downgrade by the rating agencies. So from our point of view, oil prices are going to go up no matter what, just on that view. However, I would like to make the comment here that Saudis have already overshot the market by their intervention, and we are coming into probably energy crisis by 2017, 2018.
So that is your prediction. So we'll invite you back here then to see.
I said that so just to come back and have those dinners.
Yeah, please go ahead.
May I make a quick comment on Patrick's assertion about it being encircled? Because we hear this a lot in the news. And
many countries feel encircled these days. Huh?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
No, but this dichotomy between Sunnis and Shia has obviously a kernel of truth. But it's not like Saudi Arabia woke up today and discovered that there are lots of Shia in Yemen. And Oman is also majority Shia, by the way. And Kuwait has a lot of Shia. And of course, the Eastern Province has a lot of Shia, and Bahrain. They've been there for a very long time. It does not follow that because they're Shia, they have their allegiance to another nation state. So I think that's a bit of a non sequitur. I think what Saudi Arabia is concerned about are people who are not playing by the rules, and that includes people like Al-Qaeda and ISIS that are puritanical Sunni offshoots of more mainstream religious currents that Saudi Arabia was comfortable with before they became militant and stopped playing by the rules. So it's not quite the simple dichotomy of Sunni Shia.
Mm-hmm. So Saudi Arabia wants basically the actors in the region to play by the rules. Well, sounds like the Dutch policy. We always like the rules, the legal system. Would you like to comment on that, or Anas, or no, Patrick? Comment on a comment? No?
I'd like to have more questions from the audience.
Yeah, well, we'll come to that in a minute. But I have another, I would like to bring in another element. There's particularly in Europe a lot of discussion about our dependency on energy, gas, but also oil from Russia. So I've heard you talking about, of course, that was the brief you got here, the mandate to talk about oil situation in the Middle East. How does that influence the situation with Russia and the dependence of certain European countries on that, on what we've just discussed?
Well, there are a number of European countries which have got a gas transport infrastructure in particular that makes them heavily reliant upon gas from Russia. And those countries have been resistant, in part for financial reasons, in giving themselves more flexibility in how they meet their energy supplies. But from the perspective of a global solution, it really is not that difficult to come up with the additional supplies to meet these energy needs in what, after all, are relatively small markets, Hungary, Slovakia, Bulgaria. But that would require some investment, which the government's concerned in these tight times don't want to do. And in fact, given that the global market for natural gas is relatively well supplied, after the tsunami that hit Japan and they closed down their nuclear power plants, they turned massively towards importing more natural gas in order to produce electricity rather than using their nuclear power plants.
Same for Germany, yeah?
Well, interestingly enough, Europe right now has unused capacity to import natural gas, which exceeds the amount of natural gas that Europe imports from Russia. And there would be that natural gas available for Europe to import at an attractive price if it weren't so much as going to Japan. So if the Japanese turned their nuclear power plants back on, then there would be this quite a lot of natural gas on the market, and more coming because the U.S. is going to start exporting natural gas.
So that would be good for Europe then, actually.
And so there would be a lot of flexibility for Europe, but there would still be this problem that a number of European countries in southeastern Europe would need to invest in the infrastructure in order to be able to make use of this natural gas, and those countries have been resisting it. Now, I'm not going to be so impolite as to impugn the motives of some of the people involved, but I would note that the newspapers in those countries have suggested that some of the reasons might be that making that investment would hurt Russian interests, and that the Russians have been vigorously lobbying to prevent it.
Well, turning to oil a little bit, obviously Russia, especially vis-a-vis Europe, is more important as a gas producer than oil producer, but still, Russia is the poster child of not playing by the rules. It wanted to attend OPEC meetings but not be part of OPEC. It's one thing to be part of OPEC like Venezuela and always cheat on your quota. It's another to simply rub it in their face by saying we're not going to be part of the cartel, but we want to come and observe and have our word heard. So I think that letting oil prices fall is obviously good for the global economy, which is good for the oil exporters in the long term. And I think punishing Russia is more than just a welcome byproduct.
Mm-hmm. Welcome. Anna said the oil price will go up, basically. What is your view on that, Mahmoud? He made a prediction. Do you predict anything about the oil price, which can help all the oil consumers sitting here?
Well, I think I said there are multiple scenarios, and they depend on financial factors as well as geopolitical and economic ones.
That sounds too diplomatic. You have a
no. It takes a perfect storm in order to have the types of which have occurred multiple times. So I think if left to their own devices, oil prices should remain low for the foreseeable future until there's a global recovery. But they're rarely left to their own devices because central bankers can't help but intervene, and various countries sometimes feel that they need to intervene. So there are too many factors to actually make a clean prediction, but you can certainly say under what circumstances will certain scenarios play out.
Yeah. Well,
can I comment that I started working on oil price predictions 35 years ago at the International Monetary Fund. And in that 35-year period, the forecasts of oil experts for out 5 years have got a remarkable track record in which they have been wrong vastly more times than they've been right.
And you were involved in that.
And I, having made a fool of myself on a number of occasions,
well, you're honest
with my
about it, so
certain predictions, unfortunately a number of them in print, I'm not going to make another one. But I will suggest that the oil markets have surprised us so many times. There was not a soul who predicted that the United States oil production was going to increase by an amount which is now about 4 million barrels a day in the space of 5 years. I mean, that was a stunning development. Nobody expected it. And we could have other stunning developments that nobody is now expecting.
But maybe Anas is expecting.
I'm not going to dwell on it, but
Sorry.
I'm not going to dwell on it, but I know we made 30% return on our capital.
Is it a commercial?
I would like to go back to the Putin issue and natural gas. If you look at since the late 90s, it's been the Russian policy, and it's been very clear that Putin is really after this policy to make Russia a reliable energy supplier, not only to Europe but to the world. And we have not seen a single evidence to show that the Russians threatened Europe or cut supplies to Europe in any way. It was the Ukraine crisis and the Ukrainians that tapped to the pipelines and caused the problems. So Putin is after that stability to be a reliable supplier. He learned a few lessons from history, and one of them is that if you play with the market, you lose your customers. It takes you from 10 to 15 years to regain your customers back. And just recently, in recent probably years, when Europe and the US put a lot of pressure and they start talking about this and this and this, his action was, okay, you don't want my gas, I can go to China and Japan. So the bottom line is he needs money, and he proved to be more capitalist than what people think.
Now we're going to move to the Q&A, but I also have a question here first. And then I think that two colleagues with the microphones can start to get ready. A question here by Twitter. If the oil price will rise again, what impact will that have on the military campaign of ISIS, Daesh? Because they're dependent to some extent on oil. If the oil price will rise again, what impact will it have on the military campaign by ISIS? So who would like to take that question, as they are dependent on income revenues from oil for their...
Well, actually, unfortunately, at the moment, the principal source of funding for ISIS is coming from the Baghdad government.
From?
The Baghdad government. Because they, for relatively understandable political reasons, continue to pay the salaries of the government employees in Mosul at the rate of $1.3 billion a month. Well, but they can't pay in Mosul, so they pay them in the Kurdish areas up in Erbil, and then the cash is brought from Erbil to Mosul. Now, would you believe it, but there have been reports which suggest that when this money comes from Erbil to Mosul, ISIS takes a chunk of it. Probably about $300 million a month. And that's more money than they're getting from the oil that they produce. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a real tough one to figure out what to do about. Because if the Iraqi government stops paying the people in Mosul, that hurts their ability to win the hearts and minds of people in Mosul. But if they pay their employees in Mosul, a good chunk of the money ends up in Daesh's hands and ISIS's hands.
Anyway, I don't think that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is on the payroll of the Iraqi government, but the oil price, the same question for
The amount of oil under the control of ISIS is very small by any standard. And they use whatever they use and whatever they sell to smugglers and to the Assad regime. They sell it, and listen to this, they sell it for $12 a barrel when oil was $100. So really it doesn't matter whether oil prices go up or down, it doesn't matter. The impact is very, very small. And I agree with my colleague here on the support from certain governments, etc., because the refineries, the mobile refineries that are being hit by the coalition right now, they brought in more than 50 European-made refineries, and those refineries being literally shipped through Europe to Turkey, to Iraq and Syria. So we cannot just ignore the fact that, I mean, these refineries are, each one of them is like the size of 2 rooms. So the coalition is hitting trucks the size of almost this table, and if they cannot see those refineries when they are smuggled, that means we have a serious problem.
Okay, well, thanks for answering this question. I mean, the conclusion I draw from that is ISIS doesn't conform to market dynamics. Oil price is autonomous. Now we go to the question and answer session. Now the rules, and for those of you who have been here more often to the Henriette van Lyndenlezing lectures, you know the rules, but I will repeat for you, and it will be new to the others, and I'm quite strict at that. You can raise your hand, and if you get an opportunity, and that is not guaranteed, you please say your name, and I normally say your affiliation, but everyone says I'm not affiliated, so please say if you're a student at what faculty or a company or so we all know what your background is, and please, no statements, short questions only. People are sitting on the balcony. If you would like to ask a question, I'm afraid you have to come down. And if you come down, I promise you will get the mic. Okay, hands, please. I see a couple of hands. Go here. And then meantime, with the other mic, can go there. Yeah.
Well, thank
you. Do you mind standing up?
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
My name is Abdulaziz. I'm the ambassador of Saudi Arabia. The name of Saudi Arabia has been mentioned in this lecture or this from the panels that I should be included with the panel. So give me some time. I have to, give some response to some.
We did try to get someone from Saudi
Just
Arabia.
very short.
Yep.
I want to be very short. But regarding the plunge of oil prices, I think that Saudi Arabia didn't have anything to do with it. It's just oil markets, and the plunge of the oil prices that came along with it political gain sometimes. But most of the people that ask me that, did you mean that? Did you use the oil as a weapon to hurt the Russians or the Iranians for their oil production? The actual answer is that no, we did not want a drop of price as low as it is now, but we want prices around $70 to $80 per barrel. But with these prices now at the $50 now or even less, it came with it a political gain, which we welcome. But we did not mean it. We did not mean this prices to go.
That's clear, but Ambassador, otherwise all the others will be angry at me.
Because, it has been, Saudi Arabia has been mentioned.
Can you ask a question to the panel?
200 times maybe, so I must be given some, and they have, pictured the very gloomy picture about Saudi Arabia, but I would say that
that's
just
clear.
Very short.
You can ask
Please,
a question.
1 minute. Can I just have 1 minute?
What, is that a statement
everything,
or a question?
Everything, that statement and that question.
Okay, 1 minute max.
1 minute, please. So I would say that Saudi Arabia is a very reliable producer, exporter of oil. It has the capacity of producing oil and exporting it. It also has played a good role in OPEC as a swing producer in the past, and it shouldn't and wouldn't play this role again at its own cost. So my question is that you have pictured a very gloomy picture of Saudi Arabia, maybe two of you, Patrick and Mr. Dr. Anas. I would agree with some of the things that Dr. Mahmoud has said.
Well, he said Saudi Arabia plays by the rules.
I would say that the three of them have picture the three of them have a gloomy picture about Saudi Arabia, but maybe Anas and Patrick, we didn't have much time, but you did. But didn't you think that, as you said, some of the American administration, oil is the most important factor in the region to have the attention of the powers that if the United States leaves the region, there will be a vacuum in that region. So another powers will replace that kind of power. Maybe Patrick, you answer this question. I have so many questions, but
I understand.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I have to say I gave the ambassador of Saudi Arabia an opportunity because indeed we tried to get several people from Saudi Arabia to come behind the table, but they were not able to do so. So we did want to have someone from the kingdom here behind the table. So, but this does not mean this is an example to any of the other people who will ask a question, and now I will really become strict. So, please, your name and affiliation.
Basel Hajjas, I'm Syrian journalist. When the oil price start go down, more people think any agreement between Saudi Arabia and Washington to press on the Putin Empire, because the both country not like policy Russia of Syria and Ukraine.
Well, what is the question then?
And my question, what the thing about it, Dr. Anas Hajji, because economy of Russia more than 60-70% on the oil.
Okay, thank you. You did understand the question? Yes. I'm sure. Okay,
I
good.
think
we'll
already answered them, but
we'll take a few questions. Then we have another one there. Yeah. Here, come. Hello, Martin. Please do your job. The mic over there. Yeah, sorry, to be a little bit strict. And then.
Much. My name is Sibran de Jong. I work for the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. I have a question for Dr. Alhajji. You had a very positive remark about what Putin did. You said he was more of a capitalist than we may have thought. However, if you look at the deals in China, for example, a lot of the things related to the pipeline still need to be sorted out. And China got, in effect, quite a hefty discount on the price for gas. So some of these projects are unlikely to be very profitable for the Kremlin. If you look at what's going on in Turkey...
Do I feel a question coming
Yes,
in?
I have a question.
Okay.
In Turkey, it's the same situation. Turkey managed to get quite a hefty discount. So, yes, he's looking for different markets, but these are less likely to be very profitable. So how do you view this? Is this really going to be beneficial to Russia or not? Thank you.
So that is to you, I think, the question. Oh, to Anas. You're very popular now. Then we take one more question here that was in the back. Yeah.
I'm Edgar from Amsterdam University College. I'm a student there. And I have a question for Professor El-Gamal about your most important graph. So first part of the question is that was an inflation-adjusted graph, but I have not heard of like worldwide inflation indicator, so what inflation is that? And the second question is, a layman's mind would say that if we have a finite resource, then the price of that resource would go up in the long term. That has not been the case, at least based on that graph, and could you explain that phenomenon, please?
You are an economics student, or?
Yes.
Ah, good, that's why it's a very clever question, which I sort of have difficulty understanding, but not the panel, of course. Although I didn't get a bad mark for economics in school, that's a long time ago. Anyway, so we go to the first question, and also what the ambassador of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia said. So I think Patrick is eager to answer that.
Sure. If I may address all the questions.
Of course.
First, Mr. Ambassador, I'm sorry if I was unclear. I was trying to suggest that Saudi Arabia faces a very difficult environment. And indeed, I thought I was much more sympathetic to Saudi concerns about their security situation than some people up here on the table. But in any case, whether or not the Saudi evaluation of their security situation is accurate or wrong, I think Saudi Arabia is going to base its decisions on its own evaluation of its security situation and not what those of us up here at the table have to think about it. And I would say that the Saudi view of their security situation is that they are feeling quite threatened by Iranian actions. And if I just make a comment about the question of the finite oil. One of the remarkable lessons of the dramatic increases in production of oil in the United States in the last few years is to remind us of the dramatic impact that technological change can have, technological advances can have on the availability of natural resources. In that the shale oil reserves in the United States have been known for almost 100 years, but for most of that period of time were uneconomical to produce. And a relatively unexpected technological development suddenly made it possible to bring into production reserves which are arguably half the size of Saudi Arabia's, that we knew about but we thought were uneconomical. And there are other sources of, potential sources of oil and gas out there, which if the technology develops, could provide the world with sufficient oil and gas to last for the next few centuries. They are not now economical to produce, but for instance, the Japanese are convinced that they're developing technology that will make it possible to produce a form of oil which is found in the oceans, and there is more oil in that form of in what they're looking at than there is in oil reserves that we know about today.
Daarnaast, there were some questions for you.
It's unfortunate that the time given to each one of us basically is limited, and it's very hard to explain the ideas in details. I agree with you on everything you said except one point. So we are in agreement, and by the way, everything I'm going to say tonight is written. You can either search it on the web, or if you send me an email, I'll be happy to send you those articles. And you can search the web for an article entitled Living the Saudi Dream. And it talks about all of those issues. So we are in agreement on those issues completely. In fact, what I'm trying to say briefly is that Saudis, from lower prices, they have two objectives. The first one is to maintain market share, but not only in crude. And this is the idea, I think, that I'm trying to emphasize tonight. Not only in crude. The petrochemical industry is threatened. SABIC is the #1 on the stock exchange. It moved the stock exchange in Saudi Arabia up and down. And if it's affected, almost every Saudi house is going to be affected. So they want to maintain their market share in crude. They want to maintain their market share in products. They want to maintain market share in NGLs. And most importantly,
can you just explain the abbreviations for the audience?
Yes, NGLs is natural gas liquids. These are liquids exist in gas wells, but they are priced off oil because they are really oils. And most importantly, they want to maintain their market share in petrochemicals. So I'm trying to make the story clear that I am defending the Saudi position without my intention to defend it. And the second objective is to maintain OPEC unity, because again, the shale revolution cracked OPEC in the middle, for those who lost market share, for those who did not lose market share. And the Saudi view basically is we will let the American producers basically handle the burden of low prices instead of Nigeria, Angola, and Algeria, so they can maintain OPEC unity. The point that I don't agree on, basically, I'm going to summarize it in this statement, that the intention not to intervene or no intervention is actually an intervention.
Now, that's a very interesting thesis, antithesis, and so Hegelian kind of philosophy here behind the table. Really impressed. Now, there was a question also about Russia, I think.
Yes.
I
I believe there was a young man there. He looks like probably a student who is working on his thesis, probably.
No, he's a journalist, I think, the gentleman over there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay.
If you look at the United States and you look at the various pipelines of natural gas or oil, prices at the end of that pipeline or at the beginning of the pipeline differ from pipeline to another. So this is the nature of the business, because you are dealing with different markets in different areas and different cost of pipelines and different rent. So it's very natural in the pipeline business to have those various discounts and to have the price differentials, etc. It's just the nature of the business. It's not a political decision, basically, to do that. It's pure economic decision, and we deal with it literally every single minute on a daily basis in the United States.
Thank you. I'm sure that's satisfactory. Then we had another question. I think for you there was a question. Yeah.
Yeah, so the first part is about the graph of the real price of oil going back to the 1860s. This is the series from the British Petroleum Statistical Review, which is published annually, and they give the historical price both in dollars of its day and 2013 dollars. Now, how do you do deflation adjustment for the whole world? Here you don't even have to do it, but in general you would do it by using the GDP deflators for the various countries and weight it by the sizes of the various countries. Trying to go back to the 19th century, there weren't good price indices to use, so there are many people, economic historians, who have tried to figure out from various baskets of commodities how to construct a consumer price index or a GDP deflator going back. So these are technicalities others have figured out.
This is higher economics, from
well, but since he asked, it's just but it's actually, this is not my, the main point is this is not my calculation. These are the published real prices by BP. The other economic question, though, was if there's a finite amount of oil in the world, why isn't the price going up? And I think that's already been addressed by both previous speakers. The literature know that there is something called the Hubert curve, where it was assumed that you'd be able to produce more and more, and then you would peak. And in the mid-2000s, there were many books about peak oil, Twilight in the Desert, et cetera, which of course was total nonsense, because as prices rise, technical progress allows you to invest in methods of extracting more at a lower cost, as well as consuming more efficiently. So progressively, with every year, it takes less and less energy to produce each dollar of global output, and it costs less and less to extract hydrocarbons that we otherwise weren't able to at affordable costs. So I think earlier today Patrick was quoting Ahmed Zaki Amani when he said the world didn't, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, and the oil age isn't gonna end because we're gonna run out of oil.
Now, thank you. I particularly like the last part because you made a complicated issue very understandable for laymen like myself. A question came in through Twitter. Yeah, you can raise your hands because then I sort of notice it from the corner of my eye. But I got a question via Twitter. What if the demand for fossil fuels is going down? Question mark. Climate change? Question mark. So I guess the effect of that on climate change and on renewables. So please think about the answer to that, and then we go to the audience for a few more questions. Gentleman over there. And it's just completely at random, so who I give the floor, the mic.
Thank you. I'm Mark Beuneman, a journalist for NRC Handelsblad, a Dutch daily newspaper. My question would be on Iran. If the preliminary agreement of tonight were to materialize into a full agreement by June, which would allow Iran to regain its place in the international community and have its sanctions lifted, what impact, if at all, would that have on the oil price? Thank you.
Yeah, a very relevant question now with the what's happening today in Lausanne during the negotiations. The gentleman over here, yeah, he's looking at me in such a friendly way, he does get the mic. So that's the way to get the mic.
Thank you. My name is Thomas Repp and I'm a student of innovation sciences at the University of Utrecht. We're talking about oil here, but oil is a carrier of energy, and I'm thinking about renewables and how the price of that has been steadily decreasing in the last decade or so. Do you see those prices intersecting and hindering the rise of oil prices again? And so that would be my question to you.
To
and
who?
To Dr. Alhajji.
Yeah.
And second part of that question would be, what would be the geopolitical consequences of such an intersection?
And that question is to?
To Mr. Clawson.
Clawson, okay. And then we go for two more questions in this round. I don't know if I'm, yeah, this in the back, way there, because I always forget it. And again, if you're sitting on the balcony, come down, I guarantee you get the mic.
My name is Rina Netjes, I'm a journalist. I have a question for for Professor Mahmoud El-Gamal. I heard you say that when Mr. Braam was asking, is Egypt a client state of Saudi Arabia, that Egypt is rather a partner. But if I look at the recent times, Egypt received 20+ billion from Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, and despite this, the budget and the reserves went down. And if you mean insecurity, I think you live in Cairo. I used to live in Cairo. But you can see that the amount of minor and bigger attacks has never been as big as now in the recent history. So what is the question
that comes out of that?
So what do you mean with Egypt is not a client state? If we look at all these figures, or do you mean like Egypt is joining the operation in Yemen by sending ground troops? That was a really genuine question of mine.
Okay, thank you. And you're trying to change his mind, I understand from this. But that's all legitimate. There's no problem with that. Gentleman there, yeah. In front of the pillar.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Van Lyndenlezing. I'm a recent graduate of the LLM Law and Politics of International Security here
Congratulations.
in Amsterdam. Thank you. 2 weeks. My question is for Dr. Clawson. I find your view on why the US has been engaged in the Middle East, the resources it has spent, very interesting. And my question would be, you said that the reason why you think the reason why the US has been involved in the Middle East for so long has been because it's so chaotic, it's unstable. My question would be, what is the US's role in instability, supporting authoritarian regimes, garrison states as Israel?
You want to ask the question and give the answer yourself?
No, I'm just insinuating it can be possible.
Oh, efficient.
Okay. That was it. Then we go back to the panel. Quite a couple of questions. So the first I asked sort of, what is the impact if there's less demand for fossil fuels on climate change and renewables? And there was another question that was sort of related to it. Who would like to take the question? Would you like to take that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Certainly in the last phase of the cycle, investment in alternative energy forms declined precipitously when oil prices declined in the early 80s. In this phase of the cycle, it's very clear that we're in a different stage of development of non-fossil fuel energy sources, that we're not going to go back, and environmental awareness is at a much higher level. And I believe that the fossil fuel producers and exporters themselves are aware of this and are themselves investing in those alternative forms of energy, and indeed even the oil majors are investing in alternative energies. So I've spoken to multiple people at Chevron who are working on algae. I mean, you're not even just working on the simple solar panel technology.
If the oil price drops, is it there less of an incentive to invest in alternative sources of energy?
Of course, but in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a big surge in research in alternative energy, and it almost died in the 1980s because of the decline in oil prices. What I'm saying is that with this wave of the cycle, I think we've already crossed the threshold where this is not going to happen again. Investment is already too far along, and the environmental concerns, environmental pacts, Kyoto and the like, will influence this research and development, which is going to continue.
Would you also like to comment on this?
I would like to talk about the impact on renewables. I would like to make a few statements on that. The first thing is, if the percentage of renewables starts from 0.001% of the total energy, and you multiply that by 100 and 200 and even 1,000, it will remain very small. If you look at the most optimistic views for the next 40 years, renewables will represent only 3, 4, 5% of the total energy used in the world. So even if we take the optimistic view, it's still a very small share of the world. We know a few things about renewables. One of them is you still need government support for that no matter what, because they cannot compete with well-established fuels in the market that are market-oriented, such as natural gas, oil, etc. And we also have to remember that when we talk about renewables, they are intermittent. And when they are intermittent, you need to have backup. And in the United States, for example, we use natural gas.
Can you explain that maybe? Because I see some question marks above people's heads. Intermittent, and what do you exactly mean?
If you look at solar, for example, you have it only during the day. If you look at wind, only when the wind is blowing, okay? And therefore, you have those gaps. And to eliminate those gaps, because you want continuous electricity, you want to build plants, either coal or natural gas or nuclear or etc., to cover,
to back up.
To back up. And in the cost they published, they never counted the cost of the backup. So, I mean, and the discussion can go on and on, but the main issue here is, even if you take the most optimistic point of view, the percentage out of total will remain small. The other point I would like to mention is, it is really striking when you think about what those who are promoting the renewables are thinking. They think that technology improves.
You're not promoting renewables.
Burn, baby,
Let me finish the statement so you know what I'm talking about.
I mean, this audience is very environmentally conscious.
That's exactly what I'm going to say.
Okay.
When they think that technology only improves in the energy resource they like. The fact is, technology improves everywhere. So yes, on the renewables, we have improvement in technology, but look at engine technologies. We have cars right now that run on gasoline that can run 60 kilometers on a gallon. So technology basically improves all over, not only on one side of the energy paradigm.
Yeah. Is your company investing also in renewables? Or?
We have a $400 million energy fund that focuses only on technology.
Congratulations. Great. This deserves an applause, if it doubles over the next year. Okay. Patrick, please.
Fine. The geopolitics of renewables. Look, renewables are overwhelmingly about electricity production. Only 10% of oil worldwide is used to produce electricity. So the question, if there were no oil used whatsoever to produce electricity anyplace else in the world, that would reduce world oil demand by 10%. So the overwhelming geopolitical impact of renewables immediately is on climate change, which is a world geopolitical question. Because that can make a difference for electricity and for heating. Now, over time, the question comes as to whether or not we can make a transition to electricity for ground transportation. Electricity is not practical for air transportation.
Because of you have electric cars.
Well, yeah, electric planes. Electric planes.
Oh, planes. Okay,
Yes, electric planes are not.
Sorry, drive your car.
But I would argue that electric cars are coming anyway because all the interesting and exciting things in cars are electric.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to come for performance-related reasons at least as much as for environmental-related reasons. So I think that we'll probably have that transition. But until we do have that kind of transition, renewables will have very modest effects on oil. And now in the United States, actually, we are likely to have a transition to a lot of ground transportation by natural gas, because the cost of ground transportation by natural gas, especially for heavier things like railroads and trucks and ships, is dramatically less than using oil. So we're probably going to get that over the next 20 years. Whereas electricity is probably going to be the next 30 years.
Shall we? Let's move on to
one more quick. The last question. Should I answer that too, or you want me to?
Well, you can just stay on the mic.
Fine.
Because there was this question on Iran preliminary agreement. Whether when there is a full agreement, what will be the impact on?
It will have a downward impact on oil prices. My personal guess would be that Iran is probably going to increase its oil production something on the order of 500,000 barrels a day in a 6-month period after finalization of the deal. And so I think that'll be about the increase in world demand for oil over that time period. So I'm not sure how dramatic the effect will be,
so not that
but I think that it could delay the kind of recovery that we were hearing about in prices.
May I jump on this question?
Yep, briefly. Yeah.
Iran, up to today, basically, Iran lost about 1 million barrels a day because of the sanctions. So whatever they do, the maximum they can go up with the production is 1 million. Technically speaking, those wells basically being closed for a while, and it will take them time to bring them back online with limited small investment. The way we see it is they can add that 1 million, but it will take them about 10 months to a year to add that. And in our view, basically by that time, world demand will be growing. And we, as I mentioned earlier, that the market already been overshot. We are seeing decline in production in the United States and Canada. We are seeing delay in project and offshore in various places in the world. And the Iranian oil will come online if all the stars are lined up. The Iranian oil will come online at a time when world production is declining. Saudi Arabia cannot maintain the 10 million barrels they are producing today. By the way, the main reason for the decrease in prices just in recent days is the increase in Saudi production to mitigate the impact of Yemen attack. So the increase of about 400,000 barrels, they are not intended to hurt anyone else more than really to benefit everyone else by mitigating that impact.
Thank you. I'm sure some people will be happy about that statement. Now we go to Mahmoud. There was a question about Egypt. Was asked.
Can you remind me what it was about?
I think it was something like, not a client statement.
Not a client.
Yeah.
Well, it's more of a statement than a question.
Exactly.
Right. Well, okay, so if you have a surplus of oil revenues, you have to invest it somewhere. And where you direct it depends on both your economic and your political interests. It does not follow that if you're investing in London real estate, then the United Kingdom is a client, and it does not follow that if you're depositing money with the Egyptian Central Bank, then Egypt is a client. It's an investment in the monetary stability of a neighbor that you have an interest in maintaining both as an economic partner in trade as well as a stable political ally.
Anyway, and what's wrong with being a client? Normally we say in Dutch, the client is the king. But anyway, okay, that's a side remark. Now, a question about the US. What is, and I think the gentleman already answered it, but I will definitely ask Patrick what his view is. What is the role of the US in stability or instability in the Middle East and North Africa region?
Look, you may think that the United States' role in the Middle East has been to cause instability more or less than to solve it. In other words, U.S. intervention may have ended up having results which is not what the United States wanted. I doubt I'm going to change your mind on that one, at least not in this 30-second answer. But I would just simply say that still leaves the question of why did the United States do what it did? Now, you may think that the U.S. action was misguided and silly and stupid, but I would just argue.
Do you?
No, I don't.
Okay.
But I think that it's very easy in hindsight to come to make better decisions, and it's much harder to make at the time. But in any case,
so do you think the current U.S. government is doing the right thing to promote
I would say
stability?
whether the U.S. government is doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing, the question I was asking is why were they doing what they were doing? And I would just simply say that what was motivating their policies was a desire to improve stability. Even in situations where they ended up having the reverse effect. It does happen from time to time, but you plan to do that, at least in my personal life, that I do things that have different results than what I expected. Right? It's been known to happen. And I would just simply say that why the United States was doing what it was doing was because it was trying to promote stability. I mean, George Bush really thought he was bringing democracy to Iraq. Now, we can all say, well, it didn't work out that way. No kidding. But that still doesn't change the fact that's what he thought he was doing.
Well, we say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But anyway, side remark, please, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, to claim that there were good intentions would suggest that you would have been more consultative and trusted people who know more about the region than you do, which you didn't. So, especially, I mean, I'm referring to the 2003 Iraq invasion, which I think everybody in the Middle East had already told the U.S. administration at the time was a very, very bad idea. And I think if after all that they heard, they really believed they were going to bring democracy to the region, then they must be delusional.
Okay. Look, that may be the case, but the Congress of the United States was delusional. And that's why the majority of the members of the Democratic Party, including Hillary Clinton, voted in favor of this. And if it may have been delusional, but it was a widely shared delusion.
Yeah. So we go to the next round. We will not have a vote on this. Some people were applauding. Doesn't mean that the others didn't agree with that, but anyway, or disagree. We go to the next round.
On the right side, you have a lot of people.
Sorry, Ambassador. We have there. Is it gentleman there with someone with the mic there? Where are we?
Yes, hello. Hi. My name is Bas van Vos. I work for the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs at the Sustainable Energy Department, actually, but my question will not be about that. My question will be to Mr. Clawson. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. If the US is strictly, or mostly anyway, interested in the Middle East for reasons of stability, then why doesn't it intervene in any of the other regions in the world that are very unstable? Central Africa might come to mind. You would think that there's something else going on there at least.
Okay, clear question. Why doesn't the US intervene in other regions? That's not an invitation, I guess. Go to the next. Do I see any hands up there? Well, let me stay there. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Nico Voitinia. I recently also finished studying environmental science, but my question is also not about that.
Too.
Thank you. Mr. Clawson, are you surprised that people in the Middle East find Americans arrogant from your sort of personal, professional experience and your surroundings in the sort of work that you do? Thank you.
That's a rhetorical question. Yes.
Good question.
Sort of. Do we have another question there? No one from upstairs? I think everything is... Oh, they're behind, I think. I can't see properly.
Thank you. I'm Malida van der Veen. I study history and law. And I wonder, what do you think, does the panel think is the importance or the relevance of Yemen for Saudi Arabia? What is it merely that its military interests are involved because it's the southern point of the peninsula, or is there a deeper reason for its involvement there? And I also understood of the lady over there that Egypt is involved in the fighting in Yemen too now. Could you elaborate on that, please?
All over the newspapers, I believe. But I think this is it. I'm not overlooking anyone here. Sorry? No, sandstorms. Well, I don't know. We go to the panel here. Patrick.
Sure.
Look, why doesn't the U.S. intervene in other parts of the world?
I've had the pleasure of listening to President Bill Clinton give his 25-minute, very emotional and gripping description about how he thinks the greatest mistake he ever made in his life was not intervening in Rwanda to stop a genocide there. And that he feels that it is a sad commentary on Americans that we have not been prepared to intervene more actively in Africa to help improve the stability of Africa, and especially the Great Lakes area. And he gives quite a gripping response to this. And to be blunt, the American attitude has been that's Europe's business. And that we have a division of the world in which Europe, as the former colonial powers in Africa, should be the one stepping forward, and the United States should be in the supporting role. And in every European-led intervention in Africa, the United States is the one providing the logistical support for it. Look, about the people of the Middle East finding Americans arrogant, well, there's only one thing that the people in the Middle East dislike more than Americans sticking their nose in their business. And that is when Americans don't stick their nose in their business. In other words, while many in the Middle East don't like having the Americans there, they object greatly when the Americans are not there. So the complaints that we hear about why isn't the United States doing more to overthrow Assad and get involved in overthrowing Assad are loud screams from throughout the region, and something which has led tens of thousands of Europeans to go and fight in Syria, because the United States isn't getting involved. Now, are European countries really suggesting that it's a better thing for the world and for the security of Europe when there are thousands of Europeans going to fight on the side of religious extremists in Syria because the United States government hasn't taken an active role in overthrowing Assad? Does that improve the security of Europe? Does that help the people of Syria when 200,000 of them have died because the United States has sat in its hands? Is the world a better place because of that? The United States, for all its bumbling and for all its misjudgments, when we haven't gotten involved, the results of, whether it's the 400,000 killed in Rwanda or the 200,000 killed in Syria, have been pretty awful.
Please, Mahmoud.
So I agree on Rwanda. In the case of Syria, I think it's more like going into the pottery shop, breaking the pot, and not wanting to pay for it. But if I could answer quickly on Yemen, yeah. I mean, Egypt has a very strong strategic interest because if ships can't go through, so if you remember the graph I showed from EIA on how much oil flows through Bab el-Mandab, which is the straits right where Asia and Africa meet, if they don't pass through there, then they don't pass through the Suez Canal. And the Suez Canal, with the decline in tourism, decline in workers' remittances, is the #1 source of foreign currency for Egypt. So you can't afford to have even the slightest disruption in the flow, not only of oil tankers, but all sorts of ships through the Red Sea and through the Suez Canal. So Egypt has a very strong strategic interest that's fully aligned with Saudi Arabia. And it's not simply to fight some Shiites there, it's just simply to make sure that the flow of trade continues unhindered.
And that's also, of course, in the interest of Europe and of the Netherlands, which is a trading nation, sailing the 7 seas. Yeah, you're right. With Dutch companies, I hope. I think the question on Yemen and Saudi Arabia, would you also like to take that?
I am happier talking about fracking and drilling than the other issues.
Well, let's not do it in this hall right now. I don't think that's a good idea. I think we have time for maybe 2 last questions. If there's anyone raising the hand, and it must be a good question because we want to end this session. I see a young gentleman over there. Would you like to ask a question?
Hi, my name is Bradley Hoffmans, and I've been trading stocks and commodities since 2008.
Since 2008?
Privately.
Yeah.
Tough time.
Yeah, it's not been very good, but you can make money both ways. My question is, if oil or the price of energy is so important to the world, why does it fluctuate that much? Why do we allow it to fluctuate that much?
You should know as a stock trader. Anyway, we'll not ask you what the net outcome of that was. Any other question? Then I give the ambassador of here in front of Saudi Arabia by real exception.
Well, thank you.
The last word. Could you please stand up for the camera?
It's going to be a very short one. Does the world have to wait for the last barrel of oil to find another source of energy?
Okay, I think that's an encouragement for renewables. So we go to the panel for the final round. Question, why do we allow the oil price to fluctuate? Well, you were talking about...
I think this is more toward Dr. El-Gamal work than mine.
Yeah, okay.
And on the ambassador question, I think he's getting to the point that if you really fill up the whole world, the whole globe with solar panels, we will not achieve our energy needs, because the density of the energy in oil basically is higher than anything else. And if you plant the whole oceans in wind turbines, you are not going to get the energy you need, and therefore oil is going to stay with us, and I think that's what he is aiming at.
Is it? Okay, because I didn't get it, but okay, you are better in interpreting than I am. Anyway, Patrick wanted to put in 2 seconds.
About 10% of oil is used as lubricants. And
10% is?
Used as lubricants, and or a little bit more. And another 10% is used in airplanes, for which it's unlikely we're going to develop any alternative soon. So we can hope to replace the stuff that's used in ground transportation and the stuff and the small amount, the 10% used for electricity, but we're still going to be using oil for lubrication, unless you want to go back to killing whales for that.
Norwegians of Japanese in the whole.
We are also going to be using it for airplanes for a long time to come.
Okay.
Just quickly on the fluctuation, I mean, you have fluctuations also of real estate prices for the exact same reason, that you tend to invest during times when prices are high, which creates excess capacity, and then you tend to underinvest when prices are low, which creates shortages. That's why we have business cycles. That's why we have fluctuations in all types of asset prices, including commodities. And then, as I suggested, the fluctuation is amplified by financial players, especially when there's plenty of credit in the market, and then it can be accentuated by geopolitical events that fuel the story for a bubble when there's plenty of credit. So I tried to give that story, but it's the fluctuation will always be there. The question is whether the world tries to attenuate the cycle or is foolish enough to amplify it and create crisis after crisis.
Yeah, that's a good final word. The fluctuations will be always there. So not maybe in the oil price, also in stability and so. I think
yeah.
You
one
still
of my
want to
favorite
put in the
sentences,
fiver. Yeah?
No, I'll just say, like the human ego, one of the most dangerous things when you think that you have it tamed is the business cycle.
Okay, here. Now with this we come to an end of this panel discussion, not of the evening, because we have something that's waiting for you, and some of you know that. Maybe especially came for that, I hope not. Of course you came for the pearls of wisdom that were sort of offered to you here tonight. Now before I ask you for a round of applause for the 3 experts here behind the table, I would like to ask you for an applause for the people who made this possible. And that's Cynthia van der Veen, Sophia Evertse and Maarten Holla, who run around with the microphones. Of course, the Rode Hood also for making this a very memorable evening. And now I would like to thank, let's see which books these are. This is the one on art in the 17th century, golden age of the Netherlands, which I offer to Anas. Thanks very much. They will make me take your mind a little bit off drilling and fracking once in a while. Now I have a book on the island in the center of the world, which is of course New Amsterdam by Russell Shorto. Hope you haven't read it yet.
Not yet.
Thanks very much. And for Professor El-Gamal, The Embarrassment of Riches. I hope you haven't read it yet, about the sort of Dutch mentality and morals.
Thank you so
Thank you very much. And now, the next Henriette van Lyndenlezing lecture is on the 4th of June. So do put it in your agenda. I will not yet reveal what the topic will be. Maybe I even don't know myself yet. And I invite everyone to the bar. The bar is open.
May I make just
See you
one
next
final
time.
comment, please?
I've never
Please,
had
I'm
this
sorry,
before.
I have to. I live in North Texas on the Barnett Shale where the shale revolution was born. And there is a gas well that is 1 kilometer away from my house. And they drilled vertically, then they drilled horizontally. They fracked under my house. Okay? And I get a check at the end of each month, and here I am, well and alive.
Okay.
And Richard Full.
We tell that to the people in Groningen. Okay, welcome. Ja, daar heb ik wel toe, een biertje. Ja, lekker.
Like something to drink?
I hope you haven't read it yet.
No, I